Whoa, we're back for some Bleach Soul Resonance, and I want to talk about the tactics versus support characters and just sort of get into what it could mean going forward for your pulls, because we now have a pretty solid idea of the next few characters after the stream, and without sort of, you know, dilly-dallying around or whatever, it's sort of important to create a framework in our head so we know, like, how much should we go in on a character like Mayuri? Soy Fon, I would imagine, is a more hyped character for a lot of people. So I'd imagine Soy Fon is going to be a character that people just want aesthetically more than just for power. And I spoke about it a bit in the original video, just reacting to the stream stuff. But the big thing I'd say is, even in the case of a character like Sojin Kamamura, Kaname Tosen, or even Byakuya, right, who, you know, has felt a little clunky at times, it does feel like the tactic character functions as the soul of the team, right? So I do want to sort of impress upon people, like, now that we know that the next character right after Mayuri comes up, will be this tactic spot. I mean, 60% ailment mastery, which is more important than the like just giving like a flat bonus to like ailment damage bonus, right? Versus, you know, if I were to replace this character with like Tosin and his being, you know, team's thrust damage by 30%, right? Essentially giving you a level 30 extra slot 1. And not on top of the effects that he has himself, or, you know, if you replace him with Aizen, who just gives an all type damage bonus of, you know, plus 30%. Right, so these are big components. We know that Mayuri should have something relegated to just crit, is a universal buffer for ailment, so on and so forth, it seems like. But this sort of pales in comparison then to the fact that not only is Aizen providing that bonus, but if you go here to his actual, like, unrivaled stam, he gets like 25. Upon reaching full stacks, you get a 25% crit damage bonus that he passes on to other people with illusion, because illusion stacks, which gives spirit damage as well, up to 10 stacks, also provides that buff, right? Not only that, his ability to proc counterattacks do massive amounts of damage, and I don't remember which of his debuffs actually does this, but he has a debuff that lowers defense, essentially. And as we sort of know, as with like other games of this type, yeah, it's Ravage. There was, you know, the effects of Ravage by 3%, right? So reducing their all type resistance for 15 seconds, right? So up to 6 times. The effect of Ravage is upgraded by 3%, etc., right? So I do want people to know that and anticipate that when it comes to Soifon, when it comes to, you know, how, like, if you're free to play low spending, maybe you just went all in for Nilel, maybe you wanted a boundary too, etc. I had a big conversation yesterday about boundaries are going to make sustainable characters for big chunks of time, because here's like the flat of it. If I go to my net, I'm going to reiterate this point. Here's like the short of it. I just need to get back to Nilel. Here's short of it. If I go to Nilel and I go to boundary, say tomorrow Mayuri releases, and actually JK, he's a thrust character, tactic, and he's just trying to replace Nilel. I literally cannot pull for Mayuri then. And it's because I pulled Boundary 2, which gives an 80% crit damage buff, right? Not even counting the fact that she's giving 20% more to thrust damage characters. So in this mythical world where we say that Mayuri is just like a power crept B0 version of Nilel, before I even consider pulling him, he would have to provide me at B0 minimum something that can equate to 30 seconds of 80% crit damage, as well as the 20% thrust damage, as well as the natural battlefield skill she's providing that gives 60% ailment mastery, right? And the fact that she's obviously giving the counterattacks and so on and so forth. So it's, without having to go over her entire skill, like her skill set, I know that the B0 version of this character, at least for a while, is not going to be doing that, right? So oftentimes when it's going to come to replacing, quote unquote, replacing characters, besides just wanting to pull characters because they're fun, you're going to have a harder time replacing limited characters who are duped than standard characters. You know, a lot of it was made of like, well, if I have Tosin duped, then can I just skip Nellel? And it's like, sure, but not quite. Because standard characters, as I've gone over before, and if you've been here before, you know what I'm about to say. A lot of the standard character dupes are selfish. So 10 wound, that affects him. It makes him do more damage. 100% wound makes him do more damage. Skills, 100% ailment damage makes him do more damage. After releasing Battlefield, he gets 2 skill flash strikes, makes him do more damage. The exception to this is a Komomura who has, hey, when you're shielded, when you put up your shield, 40% crit damage. That's what made Komomura pretty valuable up until we're now seeing Soifon come in. And I expect whatever Soifon is doing, the reason Soifon is going to be much, much better, much, much stronger than Komomura, you know, obviously he's a standard character, is going to come down to his lack of modernity, which means that Komomura has a little bit of an unwieldy ult. It has this like deathless mechanic that's not really used in any content. He doesn't do the most damage until maybe you start talking about getting him up to here and especially here. Of course, he's a free-to-play character. He's a standard character, which means you will by and large have more versions of him sitting around than not. But I'd imagine that by the time you're thinking about getting a Boundary 1 or a Boundary 2 in Soifon, and she's, you know, building up that rocket launcher and she lets that bitch fly and it does 13 million damage, Komomura is just not going to have anything to compete with that. Mayuri probably isn't going to have anything to compete with that, right? Right now, I'm expecting Mayuri to be sort of a super duper version of Rangiku, who is extremely good, by the way. Extremely low stat requirements. Essentially just needs ultimate charge rate, and attack percent. You can get her ailment damage bonus because at dupe 2, which we should all have, she does give some of her ailment damage bonus to her allies, right? I assume he will be a super duper version of her, a super duper version of Kisuke, who their damage is hard to quantify. We just know that when we see like the end statistics of a Kisuke run or a Rangiku run where they're helping out the ailment team, you know, they definitely influence, especially like the top ends of like an LL, right? An LL who could go from doing like 80 million to 100 million if she has Kisuke on the team. That's not nothing. It essentially means that Mayuri will be providing about 20 million damage of his own just based on giving out his buffs, right? So we don't know how strong Poison will be. Poison could end up being extremely powerful. Who knows, right? It could be, or it could just end up being complementary like Rangiku's Ash Blades is. It's important to sort of just have these metrics in your head. Not only that, we did hear from the devs themselves, I believe, that Mayuri will not be a character who requires a high amount of dupes to show his potential. That might be 1, that might mean 2, or it might mean 0. And 0 would be what I imagine, because up until even 2, Yodahara's dupes don't really mean anything. If you don't have 2 more dupes of Yodahara, it's not really anything. So a lot of his power probably will just inherently come from the power of his kit. I mean, Rangiku's, for example, and again, it's hard to compare because she is an SR, but her most powerful is around dupe 2. Dupe 1 definitely is powerful itself, though, for the ultimate energy, okay? But yeah, it's worth considering. It's worth considering because we know that the first 2 dupes, especially dupe 1 with Aizen, and the first 2 dupes, especially dupe 2, but both dupes, honestly, both dupes with Nellel here are extremely powerful. And I would expect it to look more like that when it comes to Soifon than it will look when it comes to Mayuri. So I'm not saying to skip Mayuri, but I am saying that if you are someone who went dupe 2 on Nellel, you're free to play, you're low spending, you went pretty in on Nellel, just remember that if you don't get a skip in anytime soon, it's going to make it extremely hard, extremely difficult to dupe potentially a character like Grimjaw when he releases for Half Annie. Now that we know And we don't know what's coming in April, or yeah, about late April, I believe, for after Soifon. Could be another hype character. Could be a Yukitake, a Shunsui, a Yamamoto, a blah 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 blah. All right, it could be any of these characters. I'm hoping to get Shunsui sooner rather than later. Probably going to be a support character. We might end up seeing the spirit support. Maybe Yukitake would be perfect for that, honestly, with his elemental damage. I said before, spirit characters, if they're not characters that use a lot of Hado, they seem to be characters who like border on like elemental, right? So that could be a thing. That's it really. I just want to sort of add a little bit of a stopping point here. And of course we don't know what his weapon does yet, or maybe we do, maybe it's been since leaked, but I don't want to confirm anything. His weapon could be something worth investing in. If it is, I would I don't know. Maybe Mayuri would be a character that if you go in on him, maybe you just want him, not his weapon. That could be a thing. The issue with the weapons, though, is while a DPS character might have a weapon that does like, you know, it might have a weapon that gives you damage, obviously, but maybe you could replace it with something free to play. I feel like the support character, like Yodohara, you know, literally giving him an extra stat, you know, stacks of Reishi analysis, like a Rangiku, literally giving her the ability to not be interrupted when she channels her, you know, main ability. It's like extremely necessary. I could imagine the weapon being all too important to sort of skip out on, and that is another like fear. But yeah, I think those are my feelings on Soifon versus Mayuri. I would really look towards Soifon as the next big character, because we're going to see what limited supports look like, but we know what limited sub DPSs have looked like. Limited sub DPSs carry these teams, and maybe Soifon will be the first one not to, but I doubt it. I super doubt that. Like, let's be honest, I super doubt that. So with all that being said, though, I've been Lone. Like, if you liked the video, subscribe to the club. We all go make it, and peace.